Hello. One of the greatest problems, it seems to me, that we have as human beings is that we believe our thoughts. And why shouldn't we? A large brain, a lot of thinking going on, and maybe thinking that separates us from other animals, make us the top end of the animal kingdom that we are. But this thinking about thoughts, and those thoughts are true, is our greatest weakness. Let me explain. So, there are a lot of people who are suffering right now, all over the place. People come to me, people say, sort out my life. And I say to them, you have a greater chance of winning the national lottery than me sorting out your life. The only person who can sort out your life is you. And what I can do is try and make you understand why you think you suffer. Right? It may not be suffering itself, why you think you suffer. And there's a lot of people in this position. And it seems to me that the psychiatric professionals are either overrun or they're incapable of helping these people. I mean, we're not talking about psychotics, we're not talking people who have real problems with their mind, people who need medication or something like that. We're talking about people who genuinely have sorrow, who genuinely want to be more happy. And really, in order to understand how to make them a little bit better, we have to understand the nature of how we're composed, how we're built up. And the best way that I can think of is how the wisdom traditions looked at us. And very simply, let's draw the old stick man. So the wisdom traditions split us up into effectively two bodies. One they call the physical body, and the other one they call the subtle body. The physical body related to everything that you're aware of. So, my entire body, and indeed physical means that which is perceptible to the senses. So the fact that you can see me is as a result of your physical body seeing my physical body. So the sort of things that are in the physical body are the fact that clearly you have a body and you have these senses. 2 eyes, ears, nose, taste, and touch. Touch is very interesting because touch, the sensitiveness of touch is something that is throughout the body, is throughout the skin, and therefore the skin is our organ of touch. So, organ of sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch. So, through these we perceive the world and we perceive the physical world, and that is our physical body. But clearly that's not all, because that's not where we do our thinking. You might say, well, we do our thinking in our brain. The brain is a physical item, right? It's thoughts that are non-physical. Thoughts that are imperceptible. So the things that are imperceptible to our senses, such as life force and things like thoughts, these belong to the subtle body. And you clearly know that there's a difference. You can have a corpse with a perfectly good brain, but there's no thinking going on. There's no life force within that body. So clearly they're different things. So they split them up into these two different ways. And whilst we have a physical body, everybody understands that. The problem with the subtle body is that it is imperceptible to anyone but its owner. This means you can have a thought, but the only way you're going to get this thought expressed so that it's perceptible to others is that if you manifest it within the physical body. So, happy thought. Unhappy thought. You need a physical gesture. And some of these can be really quite easy, such as anger, all right? Or really sad. But others are a little bit softer, so things like envy or guilt. You may be able to find it through somebody's actions. But then there are really difficult ones like self-esteem, insecurity, which may only be perceptible over a period of time once you get to know people. So, the processes of our subtle body are imperceptible to the outside world except when manifested through the physical body. We need to express them for other people to know them. The only person that know them are us. We know our thoughts. We know everything that goes on within our mind, within our subtle body. All right? And we really need to understand this. So I'm going to start with a very basic question. Are you alive? As usual, my questions tend to look at first to be very silly questions. But think about it. Are you alive? And you would say, of course I'm alive. I'm watching you, aren't I? I'm hearing you. And so that means that my eyes are working, that my hearing is working. If you're nibbling a piece of cheese at this moment, then your taste and your smell senses are also working. And your sense of touch is working because if you're sat down, standing up, if you're wearing clothes, you'll be feeling all of those, the temperature of the room that you're in. So all of those are working, and you know that they're working, and so you come to the conclusion, yes, I'm alive. Okay? Now, even when those sense organs are turned off, the mind can still process. So you could be having a dream, and within the dream, you could have all of the same senses apparently appearing to you, and within the dream, you could say, I'm alive. Indeed, when you appear inside a dream, you always think that you're fully alive. But of course, you're dreaming. You're not fully awake. So, you know that you're alive either in the waking state or in the dream state as a result of identifying what's going on. And principally, what you're identifying are the responses to your senses. All right? So, if we draw one of my classic side profile heads, there you go, big head, because we're going to put a lot on there. Eyes, nose, mouth, ears, skin, all over. Then, in here, we have a giant brain. Most of us have a giant brain, but there you go, giant brain, and it is taking the signals from our sense organs. With me so far? So, if I were to ask you the question, where do you see that tree? I didn't say, what do you see? Do you see a tree? I'm saying, where do you see that tree? Do you see it in the eye? No, the light goes through the eye, hits the back of the retina. Do you see in the retina? Well, there's an image there, but All that it generates is electrical impulses that go down the optic nerve. Do you see in the optic nerve? No. Do you see in the brain where the optic nerve signals go? Probably, because somewhere in here is the visual cortex. Is the visual cortex where you see? Is that physical bit? Well, yes and no, really. It gets a bit tricky at this point. Certainly, the signals are processed at that time, but a meaning that is made out of the signals that are received, that happens in a much larger capacity. What I want to get over is the fact that whatever you see as a thought form. That tree appears in your consciousness, inside your mind, if you like. It's a subtle activity. The eyes, which are a gross physical body attribute, your eyes are sense organs, they lead to the sense of vision. And vision happens as a process in your mind. It means that whatever you see only appears in your mind. It's as if it's been put out onto a screen, and you're the observer of what's on the screen. All right? Do you know that what you see in your mind equates to what is outside? You think you do, but you have no way of knowing. Because the only way that you can see anything is by seeing it in your mind. The same, by the way, is true for all the other sense organs. They pick up the sensory input, but then they transmit it to the mind for analysis. So, effectively, every perception that we have happens in the mind. And we have no idea whether that perception is true to reality or not. We only see a certain bandwidth within the electromagnetic spectrum to see certain colors. We can't see radio waves, for example. All right? We can't even see infrared that other animals can. The world would be completely different to look at if we could see infrared. Right? We can't hear like bats. We can't feel like the legs of a spider. So our senses are limited, and the way that we view the world in our mind is determined by our senses. So it is true to say we are not in the world is within me. That's the only example of the world we know, is whatever takes place in our mind. So, it's going to be extremely important to understand how our mind is actually processing this information. So, the wisdom traditions of the East effectively split up the mind into 4 distinct sectors. The first one, they confusingly called the mind. This is a separation for the purposes of study. Nobody's saying that you've got different sections in your brain that deal with different types of mental activity, all right? Although we can have certain sections that relate to vision and other things. But the 4 aspects that they thought about were mind, memory, intellect, and ego. The mind, they say, was effectively a way of collecting information from the outside world, bring it in for processing. So, for instance, the visual cortex would be part of the mind, so that you can sort out these signals into some sort of vision. The mind also is one for vacillating. So having got the information, you might say, is that a blue car or is it a red car? Is that John? Yes, it looks like John. Maybe not. It's also the part where we have emotion. Does he love me? Does he love me not? Right? So the mind really vacillates. It has information, a bunch of information, raw information, which requires to be evaluated. And that evaluation is performed by the memory. The memory brings out from its databanks information that with which it can evaluate the current information that's coming in, current data. And it performs that analysis, that evaluation, and if need be, records that for future use. That's what the memory is doing. The intellect, once supplied with that evaluated information, makes the assertion, makes the decision. Yes, that's the data. This is what we're going to do with it. It takes the decision role within the mind. And the ego looks at that process and says, that's mine. It is the doer. It is the I thought. It takes ownership of everything else that has gone before. So if everything else has just identified a car, a red car, the ego will say, that's my car. So, 4 aspects of the mind. So, everything that we see, we process to figure out what it might be. We evaluate to figure out what it is. Intellectually, we take the firm decision, it is in fact that and nothing else. And then the ego takes over as master controller and say, I thought of that. The ego takes control over everything. That's why it's called the ego. It is the I thought. It thinks it is not only supreme over the other aspects of the mind, but because the mind is supreme over the body, the mind is supreme over the physical world, the ego thinks it's at the top of the structure. So, let's recap. Whatever happens to the outside world is only perceived by the mind. The mind is part of the subtle body. It's imperceptible to outside people. It is only perceptible by us projecting it through our physical body so that it can be seen by others as a physical body attribute, because nobody can read your mind, despite what they say. Nobody can read your mind except you. The fact that we can read our minds means that the minds must be there. The subtle body is there. And the mind itself can be split into the areas where we take the information, we evaluate it, we assert it, and we take ownership of it. If the entire world is but a thought, then everything that we perform in life processes that thought, creates a result of that thought, and from that result we go on to the next process. It's all in our mind. Therefore, if you want to change the world, all you have to change is your thinking. If you believe your thinking to be true, the world will stay the way it is. Once you start disbelieving your thoughts and think something else, the world will change for you. In the next video, we'll try and discuss how we may be able to take this idea and take an incorrect thought and try and correct it.